The playback ended. The room went quiet. Then a 12-year-old said the one thing that could stop a Motown session cold: "Don't erase that." Michael Jackson stood in the center of Studio A, headphones still around his neck, watching the engineer's hand hover over the console. The red light above the door had been dark for 30 seconds. Everyone else, his brothers, the session drummer, the assistant who'd been running coffee all morning, had already started moving toward the lounge. But Michael hadn't moved. His eyes stayed locked on the 2-inch tape, slowly spooling to a stop. The engineer, a man named Frank, whose gray temples and permanent squint said he'd survived 2 decades of Motown's relentless schedule, didn't look up. His fingers rested on the console's center strip, inches from the erase function. "Kid, it's protocol. We cleaned the vocal track. Your foot was tapping through the whole bridge." "I know," Michael said. His voice hadn't dropped yet, but it didn't waver. The jacket sleeves bunched at his wrists when he crossed his arms. "That's what I want to keep." Frank's hand paused. The studio's air conditioning kicked on with a low, mechanical groan. He glanced at the producer stationed near the back wall, a younger guy, maybe 30, clipboard tight against his chest, eyes already checking his watch. They had another group booked in 90 minutes. The schedule board in the hallway showed 3 more sessions stacked behind this one, and the maintenance log taped to the mixing desk warned that the studio's backup machine had been glitching since Tuesday. 1 tape, 1 chance to get it right. Frank had erased bigger mistakes than a foot tap. Last month, a guitarist's chair squeak. 2 weeks ago, a backing singer's inhale. Standard practice. Clean the track, preserve the polish. That's what the manual said. "Michael," the producer said, his tone careful, "we appreciate the energy, but those sounds, foot taps, finger snaps, they're not on the chart. They'll muddy the percussion mix." The words landed flat. Michael turned to face him. His jacket, red, too big in the shoulders, caught the studio light. "They won't muddy it. They'll make it breathe." The producer's pen stopped mid-note. Frank leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. The assistant, a college kid named Ray, who'd been shadowing the session all week, looked between the 3 of them like he'd just walked into a conversation he wasn't cleared for. "Breathe," Frank repeated. He took his glasses off, pinched the bridge of his nose, then put them back on. "You want us to print noise so the track can breathe." "It's not noise." Michael stepped closer to the console, close enough to see the EQ curves drawn on the strip of tape Frank had labeled vocal. "Take 7. His reflection wavered in the glass over the VU meters. "When I was singing the second verse, I felt the pocket shift. The drums were perfect, but something was missing. So I started tapping. 4 on the floor, but offbeat. Just my heel on the carpet, and when I snapped on the 3, it locked in." He looked at Frank, then at the producer. "You heard it. I know you did." Frank didn't answer right away. He reached for the playback switch, rewound 15 seconds, and hit play. The reels spun backward, then stopped. Silence for a beat. Then the track rolled through the speakers, bass line smooth, drums tight, Michael's vocal riding the center with that glide that made people stop talking, and underneath it, faint but present, unmistakable once you knew to listen for it. A muted thump, a crisp snap, a human heartbeat woven into the grid. The producer tilted his head. Ray leaned forward without realizing it, one hand braced on the armrest of the couch. Frank stopped the tape. The silence that followed had weight. "It's audible. That's the problem." "That's the point," Michael said. The producer exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, the way people do when they're calculating whether the next sentence will cost them time or money. "Michael, look, Mr. Carter," Michael interrupted, and the formality in his voice made the room feel smaller. If you erase that, the song's going to sound like every other track we've cut this month. Clean, safe, forgettable." He paused, and for a moment he looked less like a kid in an oversized jacket and more like someone who'd already spent half his life in rooms like this, fighting for inches. People don't remember safe. Carter, the producer, glanced at the clock above the door. 68 minutes until the next session. The tape machine's reel sat motionless, waiting. Frank's hand rested on the console, 2 fingers tapping a rhythm that had nothing to do with the song. "Here's the part you can't miss," Michael said, his voice quieter now, and something in the way he said it made everyone stop moving. "When we play this back next week, or next year, or whenever, people are going to feel something they didn't expect. They're going to hear a song that moves, not because the drums are perfect, because it sounds like a real person was in the room." He looked at Frank. "You know I'm right." Frank didn't confirm it, but he didn't reach for the erase button either. Carter stepped closer to the console, hands in his pockets, clipboard abandoned on the couch behind him. The budget sheet sticking out of it showed red ink in at least 2 columns. Michael had seen it when Carter first walked in. "If we keep it and the mix engineer hates it, we'll have to recall the session. That's another 4 hours, another union clock-in, another call I have to make to people upstairs." "He won't hate it," Michael said. "You don't know that." "I do." No hesitation. The same tone he'd used last month when he told the choreographer the spin should come on the 2, not the 3. The room held its breath. Ray watched Frank's hand, still resting near the faders, still not moving toward the erase function. The tape machine's cooling fan hummed in the silence, filling the space where someone's decision should have been. Outside in the hallway, footsteps passed, probably the janitor on his mid-morning rounds. Frank finally spoke. "I've been running sessions here since before you were born, kid, and I've heard a lot of singers tell me what's going to work." He leaned forward, elbows on the console, eyes on the meters even though nothing was playing. "Most of them are wrong." Michael didn't flinch. "What about the ones who weren't?" Frank's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite frustration. He looked at Carter. Carter looked at the clock. The second hand swept past 47 minutes. "One condition," Carter said. "We print 2 versions, one with your foot taps and snaps, one clean, like Frank wanted. If the label picks the clean one, we don't have this conversation again." Michael nodded. "Deal." Frank exhaled, long and slow, like a man who'd just agreed to something he'd probably regret, but couldn't quite argue against. He reached for the patch bay, pulled a cable. The connection broke with a soft pop. Rerouted the signal through the auxiliary bus. "Ray, grab me a fresh reel from the lockup, 2-inch, doesn't matter the brand. We're bouncing this to a safety copy before we do anything stupid." Ray moved fast, grateful for something to do that wasn't standing in the middle of a creative standoff. His sneakers squeaked on the linoleum. The lockup key hung on a ring near the light switches. The door clicked shut behind him. The studio settled back into its working silence. Machines waiting, lights steady, the smell of warm electronics and old carpet, and that faint chemical tang of splicing tape that never quite left the room. Michael stepped back from the console, hands in his pockets, shoulders loose. He looked at the microphone hanging in the center of the room, the pop filter still crooked from 3 takes ago, and something in his posture said he'd already moved past the argument. He'd won. Or maybe he'd just bought himself enough time to prove he was right. Frank threaded the tape onto the spare machine, flipped the tension arms into place, checked the alignment. "You really think people are going to notice?" "They won't notice," Michael said. "They'll feel it." Carter picked up his clipboard, scanned the session notes, then set it down again. "For the record, If this doesn't work, it'll work, Michael said. Not defensive, not cocky, just certain. Ray returned with the fresh reel, handed it to Frank, and took his spot near the back wall. Frank mounted the tape, threading it through the guides with the muscle memory of 10,000 sessions, checking the tension. He calibrated the levels, watched the alignment tones, and hit record on the safety pass. The reels started turning, slow and deliberate, committing the decision to oxide and plastic. The VU meters bounced in rhythm, needles swinging into the yellow but never quite, hitting red. The producer watched the meters bounce. The assistant watched the producer. Michael watched the tape, the way the reels caught the light as they turned. And somewhere in the back of Frank's mind, under the instinct to clean every track, under decades of training that said noise was the enemy, a small, stubborn thought began to form. What if the kid's right? The safety copy finished. Frank labeled it with a grease pencil. Bold capitals, today's date, safety, underlined twice. Then he filed it in the lockup bin, metal sliding against metal. He sat back down at the console, pulled up the faders, and played the track one more time. The vocal came through clean and strong, Michael's phrasing effortless, hitting every note like he'd been born knowing the melody. And underneath it, woven so tightly into the groove that you almost couldn't separate it from the drums, that rhythm, thump, snap, alive and human and undeniably there. Carter listened all the way through. When it ended, he didn't say anything for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded once, picked up his clipboard, and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back. "Michael, you're on vocals again Thursday. 2 p.m., don't be late." Michael grinned. "I won't." The door closed. Ray started breaking down the mic stand, carefully coiling the cables the way Frank had shown him on his first day. Frank sat at the console, staring at the faders like they'd just told him something he didn't want to hear but couldn't argue with. Michael pulled his headphones off the stand, hung them on the hook by the door, and walked out into the hallway. The schedule board still showed 3 more sessions. The maintenance log still warned about the backup machine. The world outside Studio A kept moving, indifferent and relentless. But inside that room, on 2 inches of tape spinning in the dark, a 12-year-old had just taught 2 grown men that sometimes the best part of a song is the part you weren't supposed to keep. And when that track finally hit the radio 6 weeks later, mixed, mastered, pressed onto vinyl, people didn't talk about the bass line or the horn arrangement or the pristine vocal take. They talked about the groove, the thing you couldn't quite name but couldn't stop moving to, the heartbeat under the polish, the sound that made you believe someone real had been in the room when it was made. Frank never admitted he'd been wrong, but 3 months later, when another young singer asked if they could keep a hand clap that bled into the vocal mic, Frank didn't reach for the erase button. He just looked at the kid and said, "Let's hear it back first." And that was enough.